I want you to think about the last time you used your computer and felt like it was working against you. The update that interrupted a deadline. The notification asking you to sign into a Microsoft account just to change a setting. The telemetry you never agreed to. The AI screenshot feature that got quietly switched on and had to be pulled after security. Researchers demonstrated it was storing your passwords and credit card numbers in plain text. The operating system that told you, the person who paid for the hardware, that your perfectly functional PC is no longer supported and that you need to buy a new one. That is not a bug, that is a business model. And on this channel, we call that out. So I did something I have been wanting to document properly for Hardware Report for a long time. I wiped a Windows machine, I installed the Linux distribution that every serious reviewer, every migrating enterprise, and every person who has tried it says is the most Windows-like, most seamless, most genuinely ready for normal people Linux ever built. I used it as my daily driver. And what I found genuinely surprised me. Not because it was perfect, but because the gap between what most Windows users imagine Linux to be and what it actually is in 2025 and 2026 is the single biggest misinformation story in the personal computing market right now. The distro is Zorin OS. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what it is, why it matters right now specifically, what it gets right, what it still gets wrong, and whether it is the right move for you. Let's get into it. Before we get to the distro itself, you need to understand the market moment that makes this conversation more urgent than it has ever been, because the timing here is not accidental and the numbers behind it are significant. On October 14th, 2025, Microsoft ended mainstream support for Windows 10. No more security updates, no more patches, no more fixes. For hundreds of millions of PCs still running it, that is not a theoretical concern. An unpatched, internet-connected machine running an unsupported operating system is a progressively softer target every single month that passes without vendor security fixes. The attack surface does not stay the same, it grows. And Microsoft's own guidance makes clear that the only real solutions are to upgrade to Windows 11, pay for extended security updates as a temporary bridge through October 2026, buy new hardware, or migrate to a different operating system entirely. Now, here is where it gets complicated in ways that Microsoft does not loudly advertise. An estimated 240 million PCs that were running Windows 10 cannot run Windows 11. Not because the hardware is broken, not because the machines are slow or incapable, but because Windows 11 requires TPM2, 0, in specific CPU generations, hardware-level gates that Microsoft set, and that exclude an enormous number of perfectly functional computers that people paid real money for. If your machine does not clear those gates, Microsoft's official answer is, buy a new PC. And then there is what Windows 11 itself has become, which is a separate and deeply important conversation for this channel. Windows 11 has Recall, a feature that, before Microsoft was forced to walk it back after a security disaster, was taking screenshots of your screen every few seconds, storing them in a database, and making them searchable. The initial version of this left your passwords, credit card numbers, private messages, and financial documents in a plain text database on your device. Security researchers called it a privacy nightmare. Microsoft pulled it, rebuilt it with encryption and opt-in controls, and is now rolling it back out. But the fact that it shipped that way in the first place tells you something important about whose interests Windows 11 was designed around. Add to that the persistent Microsoft account requirement, the forced Bing integration, the Copilot sidebar that appears whether you want it or not, the telemetry that you cannot fully disable without enterprise-grade tools, and the subscription creep toward Microsoft 365 for features that used to be included in the base OS. And you have an operating system that has drifted very far from the idea that you own your machine and control what runs on it. The result of all of this is the largest wave of Windows users looking seriously at Linux since the operating system was first created. Within days of the Windows 10 end-of-support deadline, Linux distributions that market themselves to Windows users reported massive download surges. Linux's share on Steam crossed 3% for the first time in October 2025, a milestone that matters specifically because the Steam hardware survey is one of the clearest real-world measures of what operating systems people are actually gaming on. Desktop Linux overall hit 7% market share in 2026, the highest it has ever been. None of these numbers make Linux a Windows competitor in raw market share terms yet, but they represent a real, meaningful shift that is already changing how hardware vendors, game developers, and enterprise IT departments make decisions. And right in the middle of this moment, Zorin OS 18 launched on the exact same day Windows 10 reached end of life. It crossed 1 million downloads in its first month. 78% of those downloads came from Windows devices. That number tells you everything about who is paying attention. Let me give you the full picture of what Zorin OS actually is, because the name does not carry the same instant recognition as Ubuntu or Fedora, In some context is important. Zorin OS is a Linux distribution built on Ubuntu, the most widely used and best supported base in the consumer Linux world. It was started in 2008 by two brothers, Artyom and Kirill Zorin, operating out of Dublin, Ireland. The mission they set from day one and have never deviated from is this: build a Linux distribution that a Windows user can sit down in front of and not feel lost, not a hobbyist project, not a developer tool. An operating system for people whose primary concern is whether they can get their work done without learning a new language. Zorin OS comes in several editions. Core is free, Lite is free and designed specifically for older or lower powered hardware. The kind of machine that Windows 11 will not support, but that runs Zorin beautifully. Pro is a paid version at roughly $48 that adds additional desktop layouts, creative apps, and extra features. The existence of a Pro tier is worth understanding because it answers the question of how this project sustains itself. Zorin is not extracting value from your data. It is not funded by advertising. It is a company that sells a premium product tier to support the development of the free versions. That incentive structure is fundamentally different from Microsoft's, and it shows in how the product is built. The hardware requirements for Zorin are another part of the story that matters directly for Hardware Report's audience. The Core Edition requires 2 GB of RAM and a 1 GHz processor. The Lite Edition runs on machines as old as 15 years. The company itself has documented cases where enterprises extending to Zorin from Windows report extending their existing PC fleets by 30 to 40%, beyond what Microsoft's upgrade cycle would have allowed. For anyone sitting on functional hardware that Windows 11 refuses to support, that number is worth sitting with for a moment. Now, I installed Zorin OS 18 on a mid-range laptop that was running Windows 10 and is not eligible for Windows 11 due to CPU generation restrictions. Here's what I found. The installation process is one of the clearest indicators of how seriously Zorin takes the Windows switcher experience, and it exceeded what I expected. You boot from a live USB drive. You can try the OS without installing anything, running it directly from the USB to test hardware compatibility, feel the interface, and verify that your files and setup are what you want before committing. This is one of the most important features Linux has that Windows does not offer, and it should be the first thing anyone does before switching anything. When you choose to install, the installer is clean, guided, and fast. It detected my hardware automatically, including my wireless card, GPU, and display settings. It offered me the option to install Zorin alongside Windows in a dual boot configuration, keeping Windows on the machine and giving me a choice at startup, which is the correct first step for most people making this transition. You're not forced to burn your Windows installation on day one. You can live with both until you're confident. The entire process from booting the USB to having a working desktop took me under 20 minutes. That includes the partition setup, the base install, and the first boot. Windows installs have taken me longer than that just to get through the initial account setup screens. First boot gives you a welcome screen that guides you through a few basic preferences: privacy settings, software installation, and desktop layout selection. That last one is where Zorin's signature feature first appears, and it is immediately impressive. Zorin's desktop layout customization is, without question, the best implementation of Windows familiarity in any Linux distribution I have tested, and I want to be precise about what that means. The Zorin Appearance app, accessible from your settings within seconds of first boot, lets you switch your entire desktop layout between presets that mimic Windows 11, Windows Classic, macOS, and a standard Linux GNOME layout. You pick your layout from a visual menu, click Apply, and the entire desktop reconfigures instantly. The taskbar moves, the app launcher changes, the window management behavior adjusts. If you're coming from Windows and you select the Windows 11 layout, the Start button is bottom center, the taskbar looks like Windows 11's taskbar, and the application launcher works like the Start menu you already know. If you prefer Windows 10's classic bottom left layout, that is one click away. This matters enormously for the psychology of switching. The single biggest barrier to most Windows users adopting Linux has never been capability. It has been unfamiliarity, the feeling of not knowing where anything is. Zorin removes that barrier more completely than any other distribution I have encountered. The default applications that ship with Zorin OS 18 deserve specific attention because the choices reflect a clear understanding of what Windows users actually need. LibreOffice is pre-installed, the free open-source alternative to Microsoft Office that handles Word, Excel, and PowerPoint documents with solid compatibility. Brave browser is the default, privacy-focused, fast, and immediately familiar to anyone who uses a Chromium-based browser. An updated Files app that behaves like Windows File Explorer is the default file manager, complete with a navigation panel on the left, a location bar at the top, and the kind of folder behavior Windows users have muscle memory for. Zorin OS 18 also includes a new window tiling manager. Drag a window to the top of the screen and a set of snap layout options appears, exactly like Windows 11's Snap Layouts feature. Multiple windows side by side with drag to snap is built in, works smoothly, and requires zero keyboard shortcut memorization. Zorin Connect is pre-installed and integrates your Android phone directly with the desktop. File sharing, notification mirroring, phone as a remote control, all of it works over an encrypted local network connection with no cloud account required. Your data does not leave your network. One of the most practically important features for Windows migrants is how Zorin handles Windows software. When you try to open an Bash exe installer, the Windows application, Zorin does not give you an error. It prompts you to install Wine, the compatibility layer that allows Windows applications to run on Linux. Many common Windows apps run this way without modification. For more demanding Windows software, Zorin integrates Bottles, a polished front end for running Windows applications in isolated containers. The days of Linux being completely incompatible with Windows software are gone for the majority of use cases. The gap has closed significantly, and Zorin makes accessing what remains of that compatibility layer easier than any other distribution I tested. For software installation in general, Zorin ships with a software store that works exactly like the Microsoft Store should work, but largely does not. You search for an application, you click install, it downloads and installs. Flatpak packages are supported out of the box, which gives you access to a massive library of applications from a centralized, trusted source. No command line required for the overwhelming majority of software that everyday users need. This is where the hardware report angle gets very concrete, and the results are the kind of thing that makes Windows users who have been told their machines are too old genuinely frustrated. The laptop I installed Zorin on was a machine that had been collecting dust because Windows 10 had gotten progressively slower on it over several years of updates, and the Windows 11 upgrade path was blocked. Boot times had crept up. Application launches lagged. The machine had become borderline unusable for everyday tasks. On Zorin OS 18, the same hardware boots in approximately 8 seconds from the welcome screen to a fully functional desktop. Application launch times are sharp and immediate. Running multiple applications simultaneously does not cause the kind of memory pressure and slowdown that had become routine on Windows. The Task Manager, Zorin's equivalent, shows the OS sitting at under 800 malware weight of RAM at idle with nothing open. Windows 10 on the same hardware idled at over 2 GB before you opened a single application. The reason for this is not magic. Linux distributions in general, and Zorin specifically, do not run the background service ecosystem that modern Windows requires. No telemetry agents constantly reporting home. No Windows Defender scanning in the background with CPU spikes. No automatic update processes fighting for resources. No Cortana, no Copilot sidebar, no Cloud Sync running whether you want it or not. The operating system runs what the operating system needs to run, and the rest of your hardware is available to you. For the hardware report audience, people who understand that a CPU percentage point and a free gigabyte of RAM are things that have real value, the experience of Zorin on older hardware is not a novelty. It is a demonstration of what happens when an operating system is not designed to extract value from your machine on behalf of its developer. This channel covers the real picture, which means we cover the limitations too, and there are real ones that you need to go in with clear eyes about. Gaming is the most significant. Valve's Proton compatibility layer has made dramatic progress. Thousands of Windows games now run on Linux through Steam's Proton integration, and many of them run well. Linux reached over 3% of Steam users in October 2025, precisely because gaming on Linux has become genuinely viable for a large portion of the game library. But it is not complete. AAA titles that use kernel-level anti-cheat systems, including many popular multiplayer games, do not work on Linux, and some of them are unlikely to anytime soon because the anti-cheat vendors specifically block Linux. If your primary use case is competitive multiplayer gaming with titles that use kernel anti-cheat, Linux is not your daily driver yet. It may be your secondary machine. It may be your work machine, but for that specific use case, Windows remains the only option. Specialized professional software is the second area of honest limitation. Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, Premiere, After Effects does not run natively on Linux. There are strong alternatives. GIMP for photo editing, Kdenlive and DaVinci Resolve for video, Inkscape for vector work. DaVinci Resolve in particular has a native Linux version that is genuinely excellent, but if you are specifically dependent on Adobe's ecosystem, the switch to Linux requires either a workflow change or maintaining a Windows installation for those applications. Hardware driver edge cases are the third category. NVIDIA GPU support on Linux has improved substantially. NVIDIA's driver updates have added better Wayland compatibility and the open source kernel module option, but edge cases exist, particularly with newer GPU generations and specific features. AMD GPU support is generally excellent, with the open source RADV driver stack providing strong performance. If you have an AMD GPU, your Linux experience is typically smoother than if you have NVIDIA. This is worth knowing before you commit. Peripheral support is the last area to vet before switching. Most modern hardware works out of the box, but certain Wi-Fi chipsets, fingerprint readers on specific laptop models, and some brand-specific docks can require driver troubleshooting. The correct approach is to boot Zorin from a live USB before installing anything and verify that your critical peripherals work. If they do, proceed. If something does not, a quick search with your hardware model in Zorin or Linux will tell you whether there is a known solution. None of these limitations are deal breakers for the majority of users coming from Windows for everyday computing tasks, web browsing, office productivity, email, media, casual gaming, content consumption, development, but they are real, and any review that does not mention them is not giving you the complete picture. Let's be specific about who this is and is not for, because Hardware Report is a channel for people who make informed decisions based on real data, not hype. If your PC cannot run Windows 11 and you do not want to buy new hardware just to satisfy Microsoft's TPM requirement, Zorin is absolutely the right move. The install is accessible, the hardware support for older machines is excellent, and you will almost certainly find your machine runs better on Zorin than it was running on an aging Windows 10 install. This is the clearest use case and the one that applies to the largest number of people right now. If you are tired of Microsoft's direction with Windows, the forced accounts, the telemetry, the recall feature that screenshotted your credit card number despite being specifically designed not to, the subscription drift, the Copilot integration that arrives whether you asked for it, Zorin gives you an operating system built on completely different values. No telemetry pipeline reporting your behavior, home by default, no account required to use the OS. No AI features quietly running in the background. Your machine running what you tell it to run. If you are setting up a machine for a family member who is not technically inclined, a parent, a grandparent, someone who uses a computer for email, documents, video calls, and web browsing, Zorin is genuinely the most recommended option in this specific scenario. The interface is familiar enough that they will not feel lost. The software store is accessible enough that you will not get called for tech support every time they want to install something, and you will not have to explain Windows updates, Microsoft account requirements, or Copilot. If you are a power user, a developer, or someone who needs specific Windows-only tools, dual boot is the right approach. Keep Windows for the things only Windows can do. Use Zorin for everything else. Many people who make this move find within a few months that they are booting into Windows less and less frequently. Here's your step-by-step if you decide to make the move. Step 1. Download Zorin OS 18 Core from Zorin.com. It is free. If you are on older hardware, download the Lite edition instead. The download page makes the distinction clear. Step 2. Create a bootable USB drive using Balena Etcher or Rufus. Both free, both available on Windows, both take less than 5 minutes to use. You put the Zorin ISO on a USB drive and it becomes a bootable installer. Step 3. Boot from the USB. On most machines, you get to the boot menu by pressing F12 or delete during startup. The exact key varies by manufacturer and is usually shown briefly during the boot sequence. Select your USB drive. Choose to try Zorin before installing. Step 4. Spend 30 minutes in the live environment. Test your Wi-Fi. Connect to the internet. Open a browser and verify your site's work. Test your printer if you have one. Verify your monitor resolution is correct. If everything works, proceed to installation. Step 5. In the installer, choose the dual boot option if you want to keep Windows as a fallback. The installer handles the partition setup. You do not need to do this manually. Allocate the disk space you want to give Zorin and proceed. If you are confident and want a clean break, choose the option to replace Windows entirely. Step 6. On first boot, go to Zorin Appearance and select the desktop layout that feels most familiar to you. Then go to the software store and install whatever you need. If you need LibreOffice alternatives to Microsoft Office, it is already installed. If you need a specific application, search for it first in the software store before concluding it is unavailable. Step 7. Set up Zorin Connect on your Android phone to link your phone and your desktop. The app is free in the Play Store. The connection runs over your local network, never through a cloud server, and the setup takes under 5 minutes. Here is what Hardware Report is built on. The market does not always tell you the truth about the products you use. The company with the largest market share is not always building the product that serves you best. And the reason most people do not question the operating system on their machine is the same reason most people do not question the browser they use. It came pre-installed. It is familiar, and the friction of changing feels larger than the cost of staying. But the cost of staying is real. On Windows, that cost is your data, your machine's performance, your privacy, your hardware being declared obsolete on a schedule that serves Microsoft's upgrade cycle and not your budget. On Zorin OS, you are running an operating system that was built specifically so that the person the product serves is you. 240 million PCs cannot run Windows 11. Over 1 million people downloaded Zorin OS in its first month after Windows 10 reached end of life. Linux is on 4. 7% of desktops globally the highest share in the operating system's history. The market is moving. The software is ready. The hardware case is clear. The question is whether you are going to wait until Microsoft makes the decision for you, or whether you're going to make it yourself while you still have the full picture. Subscribe to Hardware Report. Drop your experience in the comments, whether you have already made the switch, whether you are considering it, or whether there is a specific use case you want us to dig into. We cover the real numbers. We follow the hardware. We will be here for the next report.